It was supposed to be an ordinary Wednesday in St. Martin's, Missouri, the kind of quiet Midwestern afternoon that ends with porch lights flicking on and children racing home for dinner. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten was one of those children, bright, soft-spoken, and inseparable from her neighborhood friends. Around 6 p.m. on October 21st, 2009, she set out to play with her classmate just a few doors down and never came back. When she missed her curfew, her mother's call to police transformed a peaceful suburb into a search grid. Within hours, more than 300 volunteers joined sheriff's deputies combing through the dark, rain-soaked woods behind the houses. They followed scent dogs, flashlights cutting through the trees, calling her name into the wind. But Elizabeth was nowhere. Not a footprint, not a jacket, only silence. What no one yet knew was that somewhere in those same woods, a 15-year-old girl was hiding a secret that would shock the entire nation. By the next morning, officers had checked ponds, drainage ditches, and every nearby shed. The only lead came from the last person known to have seen Elizabeth alive, a teenager named Alyssa Bustamante, who lived just 4 houses away. Alyssa told deputies that Elizabeth had stopped by, then left to walk home. She seemed calm, cooperative, even helpful. But something about her story didn't sit right. Detectives began to notice details that didn't match. Alyssa had been seen digging large rectangular holes in the woods days before Elizabeth vanished. Holes almost the size of a small grave. When questioned, she said they were for burying dead animals. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's phone signal pinged one final time near those same woods before going dark. Search teams blanketed the area, their boots crossing over the ground that would later hold the answer to everything. But the body remained hidden. Then investigators found something else. Inside Alyssa's bedroom, the walls were scrawled with disturbing phrases, and beneath her mattress lay a journal entry, so cold it made seasoned detectives stop reading aloud. "I just killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. It was amazing. I don't know how to feel right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now." Confronted with her own handwriting, Alyssa Bustamante sat across from investigators in a small interview room. She was 15, soft-spoken, polite, and frighteningly composed. At first, she denied everything. Then, piece by piece, her story began to shift. She said Elizabeth had fallen, then that she had burned the body. Finally, after hours of questioning, the truth came out. Alyssa admitted she had led Elizabeth into the woods near her home. She strangled her until she went limp, then used a knife to cut her throat and stab her. She buried the body in one of the holes she had already dug. The motive? Curiosity. She told detectives she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. When officers followed her into the woods, she led them directly to a shallow grave covered in leaves. Inside was the body of Elizabeth Olten, still in the clothes she'd worn to play that evening. Alyssa Bustamante was charged as an adult with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. The case made national headlines overnight. How could a 15-year-old girl commit such deliberate violence? Her defense pointed to a childhood scarred by neglect, addiction, and abandonment. Her parents were absent, her mother addicted to drugs, her father in prison. Raised by her grandparents, she had attempted suicide at 13 and was prescribed Prozac, an adult dosage that some argued worsened her instability. But the prosecution saw no ambiguity. They presented the diary, the pre-dug graves, the calm demeanor, all signs of planning, not impulse. To avoid a possible life without parole sentence, Alyssa accepted a plea deal. Guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. In 2012, a Missouri judge sentenced her to life with the possibility of parole plus 30 years. She was just 18 years old. In court, she told Elizabeth's family, "If I could give my life to bring her back, I would. I'm sorry." But to the victim's relatives, those words rang hollow. They called her evil. They said there was no apology deep enough for what she'd taken. Years passed. Alyssa remained behind bars, often in isolation, reportedly struggling with depression but maintaining contact with her family. Her grandparents insist she feels genuine remorse, that she understands now the depth of her actions. Others, including the original investigators, disagree. They see no sign of repentance, only self-pity. Elizabeth Olten's mother and siblings still live with an absence that time cannot fill. Their little girl, buried again and again by headlines, frozen in age 9. In 2024, Missouri lawmakers closed a loophole that once could have granted Alyssa early parole. The new legislation ensures that juveniles convicted of second-degree murder serve far longer before ever seeing a parole board. It means Alyssa Bustamante will remain in prison for decades, likely into middle age, before she can even ask for release. St. Martin's, Missouri, has long returned to quiet. But for those who remember that night in October 2009, the stillness feels different now. Because once you've learned that a child can disappear just 4 houses away, you never really look at your street the same way again. The murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten wasn't just a tragedy contained within the boundaries of a small Missouri town. It was a mirror, one that reflected something far darker, far more widespread than anyone wanted to admit. Because Elizabeth's story is not an isolated one. Every single day in the United States, children vanish. Some are taken by strangers. Some are harmed by people they know, babysitters, relatives, friends, even other children. And some simply walk down the street and never come back. When Elizabeth disappeared in 2009, the FBI's National Crime Information Center listed over 800,000 missing child reports in the United States that year alone. Many were resolved quickly: runaways, custody disputes, misunderstandings. But thousands weren't. Thousands of families went to bed without answers, their front porches lit all night just in case. 15 years later, the numbers have changed, but the danger hasn't. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children still receives roughly 350,000 reports of missing children every year. And behind every statistic is a name, a family, a community that will never again feel safe. It's tempting to think cases like Elizabeth's are rare, that they're the exception, not the rule. But the uncomfortable truth is that child-on-child violence has risen sharply over the past 2 decades. In some states, youth offenders now account for nearly 1 in 10 homicide arrests. The faces on both sides of the crime are getting younger, the victims and the perpetrators. Alyssa Bustamante's case forced investigators, psychologists, and parents to confront a terrifying question. How does a child learn to kill? Experts point to a combination of factors: trauma, neglect, abuse, untreated mental illness, social isolation, and a digital world that too often glamorizes violence. But no single answer can explain it all, because what happened in those Missouri woods didn't begin that day. It began years earlier, in the quiet breakdown of life, the moments when warning signs are dismissed as just a phase. When you trace these stories, a pattern emerges. Most child murders, especially those committed by juveniles, don't happen in alleys or city streets. They happen in familiar places: the backyard, the schoolyard, a wooded trail a few blocks from home. And they often unfold not out of hatred, but out of emptiness, out of curiosity twisted by pain, out of the absence of someone who was supposed to notice. In the years since Elizabeth's death, the United States has strengthened laws around juvenile sentencing and parole. But punishment alone doesn't prevent the next child from disappearing. If anything, the case shows how critical early intervention is. Had someone recognized Alyssa's emotional freefall, the suicide attempts, the scars, the darkness spilling into her journal, perhaps 2 lives could have been saved instead of lost. And yet, even now, millions of children struggle with depression or abuse in silence. In 2024, more than 1 in 6 American teenagers reported having made a suicide plan. Mental health crises among youth have skyrocketed, while access to care remains uneven, especially in rural areas like the one where Elizabeth lived. These are not just numbers. They are the early warning signs of future tragedies. To stop them, it can't just be law enforcement's job. It has to be all of us: parents, teachers, neighbors, the people who see the small things first. The sudden withdrawal, the new scars, the violent doodles in a notebook, the obsession with death disguised as curiosity. The moment a child says something chilling and adults laugh it off, those are the cracks where children slip through. And once they do, there's no way back. There's also the other side, the Elizabeths. The ones who trust. The ones who follow a friend into the woods, believing the world is safe because it has always been. Their only mistake is innocence. And in a country where the line between safety and tragedy can be drawn in a 5-minute walk home, innocence is no longer protection. Across America, communities are responding. Amber Alerts now reach tens of millions of phones within minutes. Neighborhoods organize search grids in hours instead of days. Technology has made it harder to hide a missing child, and harder to hide what we ignore. But technology can't replace vigilance. It can't teach empathy or repair the human disconnection that lets a teenager believe another person's life is disposable. That can only come from us, from building homes and schools where children are seen, heard, and believed long before they break. Elizabeth Olten's name will forever belong to that short stretch of street in St. Martin's. A 9-year-old who went to play and never made it back. Her family still lives with that emptiness, an absence that echoes through birthdays she never celebrated and milestones she never reached. But her story has become more than tragedy. It has become a warning and a call, because behind every missing child alert, there is another Elizabeth. Behind every mugshot of a young offender, there is another Alyssa, a child who needed help before it was too late. It's easy to feel hopeless when you look at the numbers, but hopelessness is what keeps the cycle alive. Every time a parent checks in, every time a teacher reports something that doesn't feel right, every time a neighbor notices a child alone after dark, that's how prevention begins. Not in courts, not in prisons, but in living rooms, classrooms, and backyards. There is no single law that will end child abduction or violence. But there can be a culture that refuses to look away, where adults listen before children are lost, where mental illness isn't hidden behind closed doors, where safety is not an assumption, it's a shared responsibility. Elizabeth's story is over, but the story of what we do with it isn't. If we remember her only as a victim, nothing changes. If we remember her as a reason, to notice, to act, to speak, then she becomes something else entirely. A warning turned into a promise. A life lost turned into 1,000 more protected. And maybe, one day, the phrase, a missing child, will no longer be the beginning of a nightmare, but the reminder of what we finally refuse to let happen again.